Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do the final part 3 of chapter 6 from the book UFO Sightings by Alan Baker. This one concluding the chapter dedicated to Operation Majestic 12. Now the other day, somebody had posted a comment actually mentioning that Majestic 12 is fake, like it's fabricated. So it's interesting that this last part is going to talk about that, and then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on it too. So pretty interesting stuff that basically one comment led to this particular segment here. But it ends with a segment called Did Majestic 12 Ever Exist? It tells you an idea essentially of what it's going to talk about, right? So I'll give this my own thoughts again, and then I'd love to hear what your own thoughts are as well. So here's what it says, the final part of chapter 6. Not surprisingly, with an organization allegedly dealing with an extraterrestrial presence on Earth, the only evidence for Majestic 12's existence is a kind of vapor trail of mysterious and tantalizing documents detailing its shadowy activities. For this reason, the reality or otherwise of Majestic 12 unavoidably rests on the question of the documents' authenticity. Equally unsurprising, these documents are themselves the subject of a heated and ongoing controversy, with proponents and skeptics alike expressing their opinions with intense enthusiasm. From the skeptic's point of view, there are a number of serious problems with the Majestic 12 documents, which would seem to point rather strongly to their being a hoax. One of the most detailed attacks comes from aviation historian Curtis Peebles. In his book, Watch the Skies, Peebles relates how in 1985, William Moore and Jamie Chandra made a discovery which they proclaimed provided proof of Majestic 12's existence. One of the attachments in the documents mailed to Chandra was a memorandum dated September 24th, 1947, from President Truman to Defense Secretary Forrestal establishing the MJ-12 group. At the National Archives, Moore and Chandra discovered an unsigned carbon copy of a memorandum dated July 14th, 1954, from Robert Cutler, Special Assistant to the President, to General Nathan F. Twining. The text dealt with NSC MJ-12 Special Studies Project and read, "The President has decided that the MJ-12 SSP briefing should take place during the already scheduled White House meeting of July 16th rather than following it as previously intended." To Moore, this provided conclusive proof that a group called MJ-12 existed in 1954. However, the so-called Cutler memo was not quite so impressive to the National Archives. For one thing, the memo was classified top secret, yet it did not have the required top secret register number. Its label, Top Secret Restricted Security Information, was an anachronism since it would not be used at the National Security Council until 20 years later when Richard Nixon took place. Even the paper was problematical. According to Peebles, documents created by Cutler while at the NSC had an eagle watermark on onion skin paper used for carbon copies, and yet there was no watermark on the Cutler memo. Peebles refers to a reference report on MJ-12 by Joanne Williamson of the National Archives and his listing of further problems with this memo. There was no NSC meeting on July 16, 1954, and there were no NSC records dealing with MJ-12, Majestic, UFOs, flying saucers, or flying discs. There was no listing in President Eisenhower's appointment books for a special meeting on July 16, 1954. Even when he had off-the-record meetings, the appointment books listed the time of the meeting and the participants. Finally, Robert Cutler was not even in Washington, D.C. or the U.S. on July 14, 1954. He was visiting military bases in Europe and North Africa between July 3rd and 15th. A genuine memo, also dated July 14th, 1954, was signed by James S. Lay. According to the skeptics, the Majestic 12 briefing paper itself contains many inconsistencies, particularly in the method of writing dates with a 0 prefix. For example, 01 August. Curtis Peebles states that he has never seen a 0 prefix before a single-digit date in a government document. The briefing paper also uses a comma in its dates. For instance, 06 December, 1950, whereas the proper format was December 6, 1950. Philip Klass and the American organization Citizens Against UFO Secrecy pointed out that William Moore had himself used the zero prefix in his correspondence since 1983. CAUS came up with even more interesting evidence that all was not as it seemed with the briefing paper. The top secret majestic eyes only markings were identical to the rubber stamp used by Moore for his return address. The lettering on Moore's address stamp was removable, but real classification stamps do not have removable lettering. According to Peebles, one obvious indication of this is the letter I. In both the Magic and the William and Olive of Moore's return address, the I is raised slightly. In addition, the pages of the briefing are numbered 002, 003, etc. This is not consistent with the page numbering system used in genuine top secret documents from 1952, which carry the statement. The document has blank pages and thereafter page blank of blank pages. The reason for this system is that top secret documents are checked periodically to make sure that they still have all of their pages. Peebles also points out a reference to Roswell Army Air Base, now Walker Field, which should be Roswell Army Air Field and Walker Air Force Base. The term Army Air Base was not used after 1943, and field was not used after 1947 when the Air Force and Army became independent from each other. Further anachronisms are evident in the use of the words media instead of press and extraterrestrial instead of alien, the former words not entering popular usage until the 1960s. Perhaps one of the most revealing errors is the phrase Homo sapiens, which should read Homo space sapiens, a generic name and the Linnean system of classification. For instance, Homo should always begin with a capital letter. As science writer Edward Ashpole states, it is evident that no biologist checked the briefing paper before it was sent to Eisenhower, yet biologists would have been intimately involved, and 2 biologists were on the MJ-12 committee according to the MJ-12 document. One of the most important of the MJ-12 documents is the Truman Memorandum dated September 24, 1947, which reads, Memorandum for the Secretary of Defense. Dear Secretary Forrestal, as per our recent conversation on this matter, you are hereby authorized to proceed with all due speed and caution upon your undertaking. Hereafter, this matter shall be referred to only as Operation Majestic 12. It continues to be my feeling that any future considerations relative to the ultimate disposition of this matter should rest solely with the office of the President, following appropriate discussions with yourself, Dr. Bush, and the Director of Central Intelligence, signed Harry Truman. Towards the end of 1989, Phillips Klass showed the signature on the Truman memo was identical to Truman's signature on a letter to Vannevar Bush dated October 1st, 1947. Since it is impossible for 2 signatures to be identical, they will always carry variations. Klaus concluded that the signature on September 24, 1947 memo had to be a photocopy of the signature on the October 1st, 1947 letter. Klaus was also informed by a document examiner that the memo had been typed on a Smith Corona typewriter, which was not available until 1963. All of the above considerations have come to weigh heavily against the authenticity of the Majestic 12 documents in the eyes of many, if not most, serious UFO researchers. And yet one such serious researcher has some interesting things to say on the subject of the MJ-12 documents. Stanton Friedman has perhaps spent more time than any researcher going through the contents of various archives in his search for verification of Majestic 12. According to Friedman, the classification top secret restricted security information on the Cutler-Twining memo was perfectly normal in 1954. In addition, and illustrating the confusion that abounds in the UFO literature in general, Friedman states that the NSC MJ-12 Special Studies Project memo from Cutler to Twining was a carbon copy in blue ink on onion skin paper. The paper also had a watermark in contradiction to the skeptic's claims. Friedman also tackles the thorny question of the date format in the documents. After reminding us that Philip Klass pointed to Moore's use of the zero prefix in his correspondence as implying that he forged the documents, Friedman then takes him to task for neglecting to mention that Moore does not always use the 0 prefix. Neither does Claus mention that this particular method of writing dates is used in numerous other government documents of the period. In addition, Friedman continues, Hillenkoetter had served in Europe and the French used this date format, to which the skeptics might well reply, Hillenkoetter was in the United States, not France, when he allegedly wrote the briefing document. Friedman then goes on to state that there are many different date and letter formats to be found in archives and many different style formats emanating from the same office. For example, in letters from NJ-12 member General Walter Bedell Smith to General George Marshall, personal notes, birthday notes, thanks for greetings, and so on, there are 4 different date formats: 29 December 1952, 26 October, 1954, October 7th, 1954, and 12-29-54. Freeman also collected copies of more than 20 different examples of Hillenkoetter's writings and then submitted them for analysis to Dr. Roger W. Westcott, who holds a PhD in linguistics from Princeton and who has lectured on the subject at Princeton, Harvard, and Oxford. Freeman quotes Dr. Westcott's conclusions. In my opinion, there is no compelling reason to regard any of these communications as fraudulent or to believe that any of them were written by anyone other than Hillenkoetter himself. This statement holds for the controversial presidential briefing memorandum on November 18, 1952, as well as for the letters, both official and personal. However, Friedman points out that someone in the CIA could conceivably have imitated Hillenkoetter's style, which makes it impossible for Dr. Westcott to state categorically that Hillenkoetter definitely wrote the MJ-12 related material. Then there is the question of Truman's signatures, which skeptics claim is proof of forgery. Writing in the winter 1987 to 1988 issue of the Skeptical Inquirer, Class stated that the signature on the Truman-Forrestal memo is 1.032 times longer than that on the Truman-Vannevar-Bush memo. The reason for this is that the photocopying process stretches the images, including type, in a document. According to Freeman, however, the two signatures are not identical. In addition, the Truman-Forrestal Harry is 1.012 times longer than the Truman-Bush Harry. The Truman-Forrestal Truman is 1.02 to 1.04 times longer than the Truman-Bush Truman, but the letterhead is exactly the same length for both. Clearly, to claim evidence of photocopying, the type on a sheet of paper would have to be stretched by the same ratio on all parts of the paper. Another important factor to consider is that occasionally a person will sign his or her name virtually identically on 2 or more occasions over a given period. Thus, to point to the similarity between the signatures on the Truman-Forrestal memo and that on the Truman-Bush memo as evidence of forgery is actually quite meaningless. Likewise, the small accidental ink mark next to the H in Harry, which is present on both signatures, has been cited by skeptics as further proof of photocopying. But Freeman states that he has copies of at least 3 legitimate Truman signatures, all of which have the same kind of mark by the H. As to Claus's claim that a document examiner concluded the typeface on the Truman-Forrestal memo was from a 1963 Smith Corona typewriter, Freeman states that this examiner was a former CIA agent, and furthermore, other examiners disagree with his conclusion. These fundamental differences of opinion as to the authenticity of the Majestic 12 documents, and thus of the organization itself, would seem to guarantee to the continuation of the controversy well into the foreseeable future of ufology. And then that's it. That's everything associated with Chapter 6, once again dealing with Operation Majestic 12. This again from the book UFO Sightings by Alan Baker. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. First off, what a segment, right? It actually analyzed both for and against this Majestic 12 ever existing. On the against side, there was a lot of evidence. There was basically analysis, not just on the way the dates were listed, which seemed to match apparently how somebody could forge things, but there was also the way the signatures matched and were 100% identical, other than, I guess, that 1.012 type analysis. Then there was the way that the documents were placed with some kind of watermark, like they were missing basically. And then even the way they were presented on paper, the type of paper, also apparently was leading to that proof of it being some type of fake as well. Then there's the way that the page numbers were listed too. Then there's the way that there was Air Force Base, the way it was listed as a name, how several other terms were basically not existing at the time of the 1940s, and then they were instead coming from a time of somebody forging instead in the 1960s. How even the typewriter was analyzed, like in terms of what was used for the actual typing, and how it came from the 60s as well and not from the 40s. So lots of good evidence, again, going against the idea that these are real, that this is a forged set of documents. I got to say, that is a lot. That is a lot that stands out. Inherently, there would be a lot more push for somebody forging something as opposed to not forging it, because there would be stuff to gain. Like there would be more riches or something else to be gained from something involving, like in this case, a little white lie of sorts, as opposed to something being real. And then there was the State Freeman side, where he was saying various ways that no, the document is real, suggesting that the dates and the way the pages are numbered and the top secret sticker and so on, like that this stuff is essentially was done in several different ways. And then he has proof of the Truman signature being identical in a multitude of ways as well. I don't know. Hindsight and then other stuff, just inherent human nature, just leads me to believe that this could be more on the lines of a forgery, but who knows? It's hard to say 100%. Just looking at, again, just things overall from an outside the box in type manner, I just see people trying to create more forgery for, again, personal gain or some other type of matter than actually doing the real thing itself. But even then, there's this idea, because I've heard of others mention as well, like the moon landing. Like, why is it how can people believe it's real? It's clearly fake and so on. The amount of people that on something like this, as far as Majestic 12, if they would have kept their mouth shut, like in other words, the amount of people needed to keep it secret would have been something monumental. Everyone would have had to have kept their mouth quiet in order for it to not have been revealed. And same thing with the moon landing. Like, in other words, there would have been something involving just the tiniest person, whoever that is, to reveal something internal, like some kind of smoking gun. So that always leads to something involving it being real or not. You just have to count on human nature, in other words, as far as whether they can keep a secret or not. And that leads again to the analysis of whether something is real. So this Majestic 12, in my opinion, all depends on the people within it. If it was real, then everyone would have to have kept quiet. You would have inevitably had somebody leaking something. They would have been leaking something for personal reasons, for vendetta, for money, whatever is the case. Or if it's not real, again, somebody would have been leaking something. Somebody would have said, no, this is fake. This is a lie. It's being sold to you as something else completely different. And again, it depends on people themselves. So who knows? I like the ending when it comes to this chapter, how it alludes that it's going to basically continue for the foreseeable future. And I agree. But let me know what you guys think. Post those comments below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.